Say that, Father. You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. I'm Krista, and we are the Sixth Sense Society. Have you ever wondered what exactly is a spirit attachment? To enlighten us on this fascinating subject, we have on the phone from Santa Fe, New Mexico, my father, Dr. George Schwimmer, longtime metaphysician, healer, and author of Earthbound Spirits Are Attached to You, as well as many other books. Welcome, Dad. We're excited to have you here tonight.
Great. Hi.
So before we get going, we are going to have a couple announcements. I just wanted to introduce you. One of the announcements I have is that if you are listening live to our show tonight, you can ask a question or make a comment, and we will see it tonight. And then Michael has a few announcements.
Yeah, we've got some really great shows coming up. So I just wanted to touch base on those real quick. Next week, we have Reverend Jim McGrath back on our show, and he's going to have part 2 of his series on evangelicalism and fundamentalism. And this time, we're going to look at kind of where the movement is headed and what he thinks the future of it is. And then the following week, we have Mystic Mitten Paranormal. They're a group of all-girl ghost hunters from Michigan. And they'll be our remote guest either by video or phone, and I'm excited and looking forward to that. Also wanted to remind people real quick that our good friend David Ullman is having a ghost hunt event at his house again on this coming Friday, July the 12th. And Krista and I will be there. We're doing a few readings. He wants to do a seance, so we'll see how that goes. We did one once before. It was kind of interesting, and some very fascinating things happened. So probably good to be doing that, talking about spirits tonight. So I guess it's going to be Spirit Week. And if you guys want to go to that, you can go to his website, and it's a really great time. He has a lot of people there that are ghost hunters. He has a meal, fantastic cook. And then you get to spend the whole night hunting ghosts. And his home is about 200 feet away from where the Manson family did in Sharon Tate. And that whole hillside is just absolutely alive with spiritual activity. So it never disappoints. And his website, again, is theomenhouse.com, and that's OMAN, theomenhouse.com. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to you guys, and I hope you guys have a fun show. I may chime in, but I'm really looking forward to this one.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So, Dad, the one thing I wanted to ask before you get started is how did you get interested in this topic?
I had taken this training with a lady called Patricia Hayes, and she was a friend and secretary and student of Arthur Ford, who was the greatest male medium in the United States mid 20th century. And the training supposedly was to become a medium, but it was mainly psychic development. And when I finished the training and I came back and decided I was going to do readings and things like that. And the second client I had came and she told me she had an attached spirit, which totally freaked me out because I knew absolutely nothing about attached spirits. And so we did some work and we discovered who the spirit was and why he was there. And we were able to help her out. Well, around the same time, I got interested in past life recall therapy. And I joined the Association for Past Life Research and Therapy. And there was a man who was teaching spirit release. His name was Dr. William Baldwin, and he did a seminar, and they recorded it, and I went and ordered that recording, and And I got it, and I'm listening to it, and all of a sudden I'm hearing this voice in my head. And I thought, oh man, I'm imagining things. And so I said, who is this? And it turned out it was an attached spirit, which had been triggered by my listening to this tape. So I interacted with this spirit, and he told me he'd been with me since I was a little boy, that he had been a sailor and he'd been wrecked on the East Coast of the United States, bringing supplies to the British. And that's how I got started with attached spirits.
That sounds very adventuresome.
Yeah.
So what exactly, what would you say is a spirit attachment from your own experience?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that we're all spirits, okay? And we're living in physical bodies, but we are basically spirits. And we have an energy body, a part of which is what are called chakras, which a lot of people are familiar with. And these spirits will come and they will attach for one reason or other, which we'll get into, to the energy field of a human being. And then that creates all kinds of problems. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is that one of the leading people in this field for many years was Dr. Edith Fior. And she wrote The Unquiet Dead in 1987. And when she retired, I think it was in the 90s sometime, one of the last things she said was that she felt that at one time or another, everyone has an attached spirit or more, which sounds really strange. And it's even more strange when you think about it as to why, not just the fact that they are attached, but why that many and why with everybody. So that's an open question. Nobody's got an answer to that one.
Yeah, it seems like from what I read your book, and I thought it was really interesting and informative, and there were the people that are interested in this field are often, educated doctors, psychologists, and they, it's not, you can see there's a reality to this. I read a book by Dr. Samuel Sagan. He called them entity possessions, but when you read the book, it sounds more like spirit attachments to me from what you have told me. So,
well, entity is just a word,
Yeah, it's just a word. And so what would you like to start with? Did you want to talk about how this happens, the symptoms of it?
Yeah. First of all, as I said, everyone, we're all spirits and bodies. And another basic assumption, which may disturb some people, is everyone chooses everything. There are no victims and no accidents. So, I realize that some people will find that disturbing, but Edgar Cayce said, we have free will and we determine everything, including the time of our death. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Also, you want to differentiate between spirit releasement and exorcism. Exorcism has been practiced by the Catholic Church, and they don't do it a whole lot. And from what I've read, the few cases, it tends to be somewhat violent. And there is basically sort of a tug of wills, a lot stronger than that, actually, between the spirit and the priest. So this is not what I do, and this is what other people do. Spirit releasement is a spiritual exercise and is conducted with the understanding that this spirit is a human being. He or she is a human being. That he or she doesn't have a body anymore, but that doesn't change anything. They're still the same person they were before they died. So they are a human being. Now, there's the importance of removing entities is, first of all, most people don't know they have attached spirits. But the attached spirits are having influence on them, both mentally. The person will hear a thought, and that thought may not be his. It will be the thought would be the spirits, and so the spirits can influence you, and you think it's your own thoughts. So that's not very good, because most spirits aren't really enlightened creatures. Second thing is they affect your health.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I read was in a book by Dr. Carl Wickland, who was doing this kind of work at the beginning of the 20th century. And he had a young girl brought to him who appeared to have the symptoms of arthritis. And I think she was only about 8 or 10 years old.
Wow.
And so Wickland used his wife, who was a medium, and they discovered that the girl's grandmother was attached to the child, and the grandmother had arthritis, and when she died. So once they got the grandmother to leave, the child's symptoms went away. So that's at a minimum, though. The attached spirit is sucking up its host's energy, and that's not just physical energy. This is your psychic or life energy. So they can affect your ability to carry out your life purposes, and so that's not very good either.
It's kind of like maybe that's why we're interested in the vampire archetype. Maybe it's a form that we subtly know, but we don't know exactly what it is, that it is taking our energy. So what?
Well, go ahead.
So no, go ahead. Answer my thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's the same sort of thing. They are sucking up your energy. They're not sucking up blood, but they're sucking up energy. They don't. Listen, most of the time they don't know they're doing it.
Oh, really?
So,
they're not even aware.
Yeah. No, they're not aware of it. 99.9% they're not aware of it. You have to tell them when you're trying to get them to go. You have to tell them, look, you're causing this person problems. At the minimum, that you're taking their energy away. And a lot of times they will apologize.
That's fascinating. And so is it that they don't know they're dead some of the time? The spirits?
A lot of times they don't know they're dead. Once you are able to establish for them that they know, you don't want. First of all, you don't want to tell them they're dead, because they take umbrage at that. They'll say, "I'm not dead."
Right.
How can I be dead? I'm talking to you.
Right.
So once you're able to tell, convince them that they're no longer. You say to them, "Well, you're no longer in your body anymore." A lot of times they'll be of an opposite sex, and so you get a man in a woman's body, and you can say to the spirit, "Well, just check out what kind of body you're in. Are you in the body of a man?" And spirit will realize it's in the body of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But then they a lot of times they will be unable to recall how and when they died, and it really doesn't make any difference. But they won't be able to recall, and so then you just go on.
So in your book, you do list quite a long list of ways in which, or situations that are at least common for spirits to attach to you. Did you want to mention some of them, maybe the more frequent ones? And
yeah. Well, first, the most common, as far as I can tell, is that it's virtually 100% sure that if a person is using drugs, whether it's street drugs or whether they're prescription drugs, or if they're smoking marijuana. In one case, I remember a person only was drinking coffee, and that drew a spirit to him. So any kind of addictive substance, you can be pretty certain that the person has attached spirits. Accidents, any kind of trauma, an illness, or if you're leading a debilitating life, childhood sexual abuse. That's almost 100% guaranteed
Mm.
to have an attached spirit. Post-traumatic stress disorder. This is one of the things that I wish that, if people could believe in this, I think a lot of veterans would be helped with spirit releasement because they feel guilty when their friends are killed. And so they will open themselves up and allow their friends to attach.
That makes sense.
And there was a very interesting case by Dr. Bill Baldwin, which I heard on a tape. He had a nurse, and he went working. He was working with her, and he found that the nurse had an American soldier, the spirit of American soldier, attached to her, and the soldier, had another American soldier attached to him, and that soldier had a Vietnamese soldier attached to him, and the Vietnamese soldier had an ancient Vietnamese warrior attached to him.
Whoa.
So not only can you attach spirits, but you can have many attached spirits. Dr. Fiora said you can have as many as 100.
Ooh.
And you can have them piggyback, and you have to be careful to check that there is not this piggyback situation, because that can cause problems in getting the spirit to go on. So anyway, a couple of other things: anesthesia, surgery, a relative dying, especially parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Going into a place, I had one person who went into a hospital and got attached. So there's a lot of spirits running around at hospitals.
I can imagine.
And if you have, for whatever reasons, whether it's trauma or drugs or whatever, you have any kind of a tear in your aura, that opens you up.
I've got a quick question for you. I guess, how do you know that if you have a spirit attachment, and is it something that tends to linger permanently if you don't do something about it, or does it come and go, and after a period of time they'll move on to someone else?
It can stick with you for a long time. I mean, I was when I discovered that first spirit attached to me, I was let me see, that was about 1984. So I was in my 60s. So that spirit had been with me for 60 years. And he probably would have kept on going if I hadn't done something. So it's possible that they leave, but it's not likely. Most of the spirits that I encounter with clients, they've been there for years and years. And in fact, it is possible, and this is kind of weird. If I have time, I'll tell the story of this one woman. But in this one case, there were two spirits who had come from past lives. They had never gone into the light, and they had followed the fetus of this woman into the present lifetime. So you can even have spirits from a previous lifetime.
So I think part of his question was how do you recognize that you have it? You should just assume everyone has one then, and then somehow either go to have someone help you, or
no. Normally a person will come with some kind of a problem, a symptom, or it could be a physical problem or whatever that they have been unable to deal with. A lot of past life therapists learned to do a spirit releasement from Dr. Baldwin, including myself. And a lot of them will do a spirit releasement automatically before they do a past life a recall, because the spirits can cause problems. So let's say I'll give you an example. I had one client, and she mentioned something about her right leg bothering me. And you use this sentence to help locate a spirit. If that pain in your leg could speak, what is the first thing it would say? And a lot of time the spirit will come through and will say something. if it's not hiding, something to try to hide, and they don't want to go. But if it's willing to talk with you, or if it's ready to go, you say, if that pain in your leg could speak, what is the first thing you would say? And this particular spirit said, I got shot with a laser gun. And I said, really? She said, no, I'm just kidding you. And, and anyway, when you ask that question, then you find out, if the spirit's going to speak with you or not. And sometimes you have to go and work a little while before they start talking to you. Now, one of the strange things about all this is that it seems that everybody is a medium, because every person that I've ever worked with was able to channel the thoughts of the spirit.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so I will say to a client, now I want you to be like an actor. I want you to say the lines of whatever the spirit is saying to you. Now, obviously, the thoughts are not in words. You'll have to translate the thoughts just like you translate your own thoughts into words. But I want you to speak whatever thoughts, verbalize whatever thoughts are coming from the spirit. And sometimes the person will try to act as a intermediary and say, well, the spirit says this or that. And I will say, no, I don't want you to act as an intermediary. I want the spirit to speak through you. And then most of the time, almost all of the time, you can eventually get the spirit to speak through you. But that's the fastest way to get hold of the spirit.
I remember in your book reading that you said most spirits were very stubborn.
Yeah, a lot.
That makes sense.
Boy, some of them are really, really. The funniest one I had was very early on when I was just starting out with this. I had an old lady come to me and she said, well, this spirit is bothering me and he's telling me what to do and he won't let me take the garbage out. And I said, what? I said, okay, let me talk to this guy. So he came through very easily. He was an older man. And I'm talking with him, and he says, "You're not going to get me to go." And we're talking and going back and forth. And he said, "I don't care what you say. I'm not going to go." And finally, he says, "Okay, now listen, George." He said, "I'm not going to go." He said, "You're a nice guy, but I'm not going to go." And eventually, this was before I really knew how to do this kind of thing. And eventually, he left her, but then she wrote me a letter a couple of weeks later and said he's back. And that's one of the things I had to learn at the beginning was that you have to make sure that you get the spirit to go into the light, because if you don't get the spirit to go into the light, then they'll either come back or they'll attach to somebody else, which is not very good.
It sounds like they're not really like demonic forces at all, though, from what you're saying so far, that not that they don't cause any harm, but that they're not necessarily, evil, like you were saying with The Exorcist, and they don't possess you in that same way.
This was a bone of contention I had with some of the other past life, other spirit releasement therapists. I have never encountered a demon or a devil. There was one person, I won't say their name because I don't want to mention it, but anyway, one person said he'd met the devil, and I later learned that he had been he was an ordained minister, and his father had been a minister. And I said, okay, now I know why he met the devil. The spirits can pretend to be other things. And they can be, well, almost malicious. One of the things I discovered, unfortunately, I had people bring me 3 young people in their 20s, and all 3 were diagnosed as schizophrenics. And I wasn't able to move, I wasn't able to help them, because these people I discovered had a multitude of spirits, and the spirits would mock me. They would mock me, and they said, "You're not going to get us to go." And so I wasn't able, those three people I wasn't able to do. Now, there's an interesting thing along with that. There was a book written by, let me see, what is it? A man named Wilson Van Dusen. And he wrote a book called The Presence of Other Worlds. And the chapter was The Presence of Spirits in Madness. And he was I can't remember if it was a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, but anyway, he was the head of some mental institution in California, and he decided to go and talk to some of his schizophrenics at length because he'd been reading about the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, who's a mystic. And so he spent months and months talking with these schizophrenics, and he came to the conclusion that they all had attached spirits. But these are spirits that, like the ones I had, they simply wouldn't leave. At least not the way I was doing it, and he didn't know how to release them at all.
So,
hey guys, just to jump in real quick, we have a question on our chat from our subscriber, Lore Guy, and he says, I'm unsure if I have a spirit attached to me. My great aunt died 3 weeks ago, and I have recurring pains in the same place that she did. I don't want to bother her, though. And so it sounds like you actually said that if there's a pain similar to the one that the person who had to experience that could be a sign.
Yeah, that very easily could be, a spirit attachment, because that's pretty common that they are going to attach, and as I mentioned earlier, they have a symptom, and but that's a good thing, because at least that way you know that she's there, and you can find somebody. You can go on Google and look for a spirit releasement therapist, but make sure that they were trained, that they're not, frauds.
and how much should you normally expect to, get charged for something like that? Because sometimes too, I feel in the healing business, there are some people that overcharge.
Yeah, I had one client that was a couple of months ago, a young man, and he told me his uncle was attached at his ear, which I thought was bizarre. But they'll attach, virtually anywhere. And so I'm emailing him back and forth, about whether he wants to work with me. And he said somebody just offered to get rid of his uncle for $2,500. And I sort of went, "Are you kidding me?" And I wrote him back and I said, "No, that's a total ripoff." I charged him $250 to remove the spirit, and then I use a different method than I use in what I was discussing with you, which I may mention later. But then I also gave him what shamanic illumination, which removes the cause for him being attached. But you shouldn't pay more than $200 or $300. Not really.
Our chat's kind of blowing up tonight, which is cool. So hopefully Krista's paying attention
I saw that too, yes.
But Robin Santos, another of our subscribers, says, was curious in cases of sexual abuse where Dr. Schwimmer said there is always attachment. Is the attached spirit the abuser generally?
Is the attached spirit one?
The abuser in cases of abuse. Would the spirit of the abuser actually, after that person passes, would that tend to attach to the victim of the abuse?
I'll tell you, I had one case where that was the case. One of the earliest ones that I had with this young woman who had 4 attached spirits, and one of them was her father, and her father had abused her when she was a child, and when he died, he felt very guilty, and so he felt like he couldn't go into the light. He had to. I don't know exactly what his thinking was. You try not to get too involved with what's going on with the spirits, but it doesn't have to be the abuser. No, it doesn't have to be. And in fact, I don't recall ever having had anybody who had only one spirit. There's usually 3, 4, 5, 10, and so on. But going back to the question is, no, it doesn't have to be the abuser. It can be, but if they're dead. Now, there's one other thing which you bring up, I want to mention, which is really strange. And that is that live persons unconsciously can attach to somebody else. I had one client come to me, and we figured out that it seemed like there was some kind of a strange relationship going on with her father. And I finally said, well, okay, it was just off the top of my head. I said, why don't we talk to your father? And he came through, and he started talking to me.
Is
And her
that
father was
like called courting? Is that what you mean by courting, or is that also just attachment when you court somebody?
No, it's sort of like courting. Yeah, it's sort of like courting. And he was about 90 miles away, but I was able to talk with him. And but I mean, he didn't know that he was talking to me, because this was a subconscious attachment. And so this is another peculiar aspect. This is not a question of a dead person, the spirit of a dead person, but the spirit of a live person who happens to be a very controlling individual. And this is another thing that is often present with attached spirits, is that the spirit at the present time and when they were alive were controlling people. So that woman who I mentioned, whose father abused her, her mother was very controlling when she was alive,
Mm-hmm.
and she was controlling when she was dead. She was attached. She was also attached to the girl, and she was trying to control the girl. And I said, "Why are you doing that?" And she said something like, "Well, she's too dumb. She can't take care of herself."
Oh, whoa. We have another question again. The follow-up is one of our subscribers wants to know, how can he tell if he accidentally attaches to someone, and does that diminish his spirit? Like, does that happen where I could unconsciously attach myself to someone? And how would I know I'm doing that?
You wouldn't know you're doing it, and I doubt it you could ever figure out you're doing it. But I think it's pretty rare. I think that's quite rare. It's sort of interesting why he asked the question. A lot of he asked the question. That might indicate that he actually is doing it, but I doubt it. I doubt it. I haven't run across. That was the only one I ever ran across. No, there was one other one like that. There were two of them. There was a woman also, but no, I don't think so. But I can't say for sure.
Now, in your book, you do include an exercise that a person can do for themselves, which I tried, and I think I had a little release of some kind. And do you still think it's a good idea to do it for yourself if you can't get to someone that is an expert in this?
I think it's a good idea to do, whether you think you have a spirit or not. That exercise will get rid of, I don't want to say get rid of, because that's negative. That will get the spirits to move, because as I say, most of them don't know they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know you're dead, you're not going to move.
Right.
So I think it's very useful. I don't think more than maybe 2 or 3% of the spirits are resistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're resistant, you'll have to find somebody to work with. But if they're just attached to you, I think that little exercise will help. Now, one of the things I want to mention that just occurred to me when you were talking, people will report to me that when a spirit leaves, very often they can tell, and they will feel lighter, they feel freer. And so there's an indication there that the spirit has left.
One of the things I remember you talking about in your book is that if suddenly you have like these thoughts that are really not normally yours, kind of intrude constantly, like a sort of a different kind of personality that normally you don't have, that can be a sign of a spirit that's attached to you. Is that the case?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, where are those thoughts coming from? If you've never had them before, and all of a sudden you're getting these weird thoughts, it's coming from a spirit. I mean, there's no question in my mind. See, we are in a time when this kind of thing is not accepted and not believed. And so people will, they'll suppress this kind of stuff. If they're getting strange thoughts, they'll just say, oh, well, I'm having a strange period or whatever, and they'll put it aside. And that's not good because they're being influenced, and they can, after a while, anything negative done long enough is going to get you down. And so
Sure.
it's not good for you, no matter what.
The one book I read by Dr. Samuel Sagan on entity possession, he thought that you'd have to be careful if you're doing the release work, not to let the spirit attach to you while you're doing it.
Correct.
Was that he said could be a problem. The other thing he said was often when people give birth, that there's a vulnerability when a woman gives birth, and he thought there should be this aftercare where I can't remember why he explained how he called them astral fragments that would attach, and it had to do with just the whole process of giving birth. Do you think that's true?
I've never heard anything like that. What could be true is that I know that there are some births that are pretty easy. I had a friend who had no problems at all. She gave birth like having puppies. But a lot of women do have difficulties. So you're talking about a trauma,
right?
So so if it's a trauma, then there's a possibility of attachment.
So are there any other sort of pieces of advice you have about just taking care of yourself in general? Because it seems like, let's say I like to have a glass of wine now and then. Does that mean that I'm vulnerable every time I have a drink? Is there something I can do just protecting myself if I want to participate?
Well, let me say this. Having a drink leaves you open to opening up your aura. I don't know if it's if you open it up adequately just with one drink, but I know for a fact, that anybody who is a regular drinker, whether they're an alcoholic or not, if they're having 2 or 3 drinks a day every day, and this is something that they need. See, what happens is these spirits come to you. If you're an alcoholic, you're going to attract spirits who are alcoholics themselves in life. So you're going to attract them by your drinking. Now, I have a theory about that, which I've never read about anybody else having. And my theory about that is that they come there to force you to stop drinking. I mentioned this on the other show I had with you, that there are always 2 agendas taking place in life. There is the surface agenda, and then there is the spiritual agenda. And the spiritual agenda is being orchestrated by your higher selves, and the surface agenda is being orchestrated by the egos of the people and entities who are involved. And I had one interesting client. I gave a talk here in at the local library about the spirits a couple of years ago, and one man came and he said, "I think I have a spirit attached." So I said, "Fine." I made an appointment. He came, and sure enough, his father was attached to him, and apparently his father was an alcoholic. And I had no trouble getting the father moved. He was ready to go, and he went. And so the whole thing didn't take very long. I don't think it took more than about 15 minutes. And I said, "Well, what do you think about all this?" And the man said, "Well, I think I'm going to have to stop drinking."
It worked.
And we hadn't even brought it up. The only one that brought up the drinking was the spirit father.
Wow.
He hadn't told me he had been drinking. So it's very obvious that the spirit was there so that the son could stop drinking.
Yeah, you were saying
so
earlier that there's always like some sort of agenda of why you attract, that's an example, that particular
Right.
spirit.
Right.
So I'm wondering, what do you think about this? I'm kind of jumping into sort of a different aside, but do you think Mary Magdalene could have had spirit attachments in the Bible when Jesus removed the demons from her, the 7 He did sort of.
Yeah, well, first of all, we don't know what the word demon was in the original language in the Aramaic. So I don't pay too much attention to a word like demon. Jesus definitely removed attached spirits, and so did some of his disciples. So, I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, you go back to the farthest reaches of his recorded history, and you will find traces of attached spirits. I mean, shamans the world over, since time immemorial, have said that spirits affect, both physically and psychologically and emotionally, and they remove spirits. So, I mean, this is a long time. It goes way, way back. I don't know why it started, but it goes way back.
I'd like you to share that story about the one that attached to your eye, the young woman, because that's really quite fascinating.
Well, this is what I said earlier about a spirit affecting you physically. I was living in Los Angeles, and I met this woman, and we were interested in the idea. She was trying to become a producer, and so I said, "Well, why don't we start out by making a video of spirit releasement?" And so she was very interested in that. So I had a friend in the Association for Past Life Research and Therapy who did a lot of spirit releasement. And so I called him, and we went down to talk with him about, the possibility of doing this. And in the course of that, I said, well, Hugh, everybody does this differently. So I'd like you to do a mock spirit releasement with me, and go through the procedure that you use, because I knew he used something different than I did. And so he said, okay. And so he started working with me, and pretty soon, sure enough, this female spirit comes through, and which was a surprise to me. But I'm lying there in an altered state, and I'm not going to do anything except what Hugh tells me to do. And so anyway, he asked her what happened with her, and the story that eventually came out was, apparently I had been living in Santa Barbara. And I had gone to Los Angeles one time, and coming on the way back, there was a terrible accident, and there was a big tie-up, and we're just crawling along, at 5 miles an hour. And when I finally got to the wreck, it was terrible. It was just a god-awful mess. And I looked at it, and I said, well, whoever was in that was killed. And that's all I thought about it, and I just kept going. And so this woman said, well, she was in this accident. And Hugh said, well, how did you happen to attach to George? And she said, he let me. So this is what I'm talking about, you see, about different agendas, because I didn't know anything about her consciously. This was the subconscious thing. And apparently I'm a nice guy, and I let her attach to me. And so she stayed attached to me. I don't know, I guess that was about 3 or 4 years. And so Hugh kept talking with her, and finally he said, well, you really have to go into the light. And she said something like, well, but George will miss me. And so Hugh said, well, you have to go into the light. So eventually he talked her into it, and she went into the light. And so we finished this releasement. And of course, I had my eyes closed the whole time. And I opened my eyes, and I was looking at Hugh. Hugh was to my left, and the other people, Hugh's wife and my producer and one other person were on my right. And I'm looking at Hugh at my left. And Hugh looks at me, and he says to his wife, bring the mirror. And he says to the other people, and he says to me, look at the other people on the right. And I look at the other people on the right, and they all go, oh. And I said, what? And his wife brings a mirror and hands it to me, and I look in the mirror, and my left eye, the left half of my left eye is completely suffused with blood. I mean, this is not bloodshot. I mean, it was completely like a wash, like a watercolor wash,
Mm.
right across the left side of my eye.
Wow.
There was not a speck of blood showing on my eye when this whole thing started. So, in the course of Hugh speaking with this spirit, she said she had gone through the windshield.
Mm.
So obviously her eye had been damaged. Her left eye had been damaged, and she was killed, of course. But her left eye had been damaged when she went through the windshield. And when Hugh brought her to the surface, her energy was still so focused on that accident that it affected my energy field.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
incredible.
caused. And Hugh said this happens very often. He said it happens very often with him.
Wow.
We have a couple questions from our listeners again. Alistair, he's asking, he thinks his pet cat who passed away is attached to him because he hears meowing, I guess when there's no cats around.
Say that again?
One of our listeners says that he feels his pet cat who passed away may have attached to him. He hears meowing in a lot of places he goes and in his sleep. So I know that we believe animals have souls. So is it possible for an animal spirit to attach to a person?
I don't know about them attaching. I know that sometimes they will either come back or hang around a person if they had a close relationship. I never ran across and I've never read about any animal attachment.
And what was the other thing? Oh, I was going to ask, I know one of the things that some people have, and I know it comes with trauma, is sort of the multiple personality disorder. I forget what they call it nowadays. But could a spirit attachment either exasperate that or help trigger it? Because it would sound to me like, again, that these things could potentially at least influence each other.
I have two examples of that. One is a book by Adam Crabtree. He's a Canadian psychotherapist, and he wrote a book called Multiple Man. And he talked about both the multiple personalities and attached spirits. I was at an association. I can't remember the name of the association now, but anyway, it's the Humanistic Psychology Association. And one man gave a talk, and he talked about the fact that he had a multiple personality, but he discovered that at least one of them was an attached spirit. So it is. I can't really comment on multiple personality. I'm not trained in it. I've read some books about it, but I think certainly it's possible that you can have both.
So I know in Jungian therapy, there's a concept of the sub-personalities too. And how would I know the difference between instead of a repressed sub-personality and attached spirit? Like, is that just something we need to work on more by being open-minded and trying to work cross fields together and not sort of poo-poo these ideas?
You can actually there is a I can't remember which psychology is involved, but I can't think of the word now. But you can talk. I think it's called part psychology. You can talk to any part of a human being. You can talk to a person's right hand. You can talk to their heart. So if you're not sure, you can say, okay. Are you a spirit? Well, a lot of times they're not going to say they're a spirit. So then you say, well, okay, when did you come to this person? That often helps. And then, or how did you come to this person? Or what is your function with this person? So this is called differential diagnosis, where you're trying to differentiate, is this a multiple personality? Is this an attached spirit? Is this a past life spirit? Is this a sub-personality? Whatever it is. So at the beginning of doing this work, when you have the person in a altered state of consciousness and you're not sure what you have, then you have to do a little bit of extra work to determine what this is. And if it's a sub-personality, then you don't have to worry about it being a attached spirit.
Right.
We do have another question from one of our listeners, real quick. She wants to know, or he, not sure which, are there any oral medications they can use to get rid of spirits? I have social anxiety and I can't see a therapist. So I'm assuming there may be some exercises they can do on their own if they're not able to sort of be around other people, but are there also medications or things that they can take?
I'm not involved with medication. I'm not qualified to work with medication, and I would very strenuously advise against using medication. The most problems are spiritual problems, which are operating on a subconscious level or superconscious level, however you like it. And my work and the work of people like me is to find what's going on that other level. So if you're talking about drugs, you're talking about the physical level, and none of this work has to do with the physical level.
Well, do you think she could do your exercise in your book, Earthbound Spirits Are Attached to You? Would she be able to try that on her own? And it's a simple exercise.
Sure.
That might work.
Yeah, no. Yeah, well, I mean, that exercise is intended for the person to do themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they can have, if they have a close friend or a husband or wife, they can have somebody else read it to them.
Right.
Or you could put it on a tape recorder or a voice recorder of some kind and play it back.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Good starting point anyway.
I want before you run out of time, I want to mention one other method that I learned to remove spirits, which there is an aspect to it which I think is important. In 2005 until 2007, I was trained by Alberto Vialdo and the Four Winds Society to do shamanic healing in what he calls the Light Body School. And one of the things that were taught to us was to remove external energies, which actually is, most of it is attached spirits. And once you remove an attached spirit, you do an illumination. Now, the illumination is a healing process. And in order to do the illumination, you have to locate the chakra, which contains negative energy, which comes probably from a past life, which attracted this spirit or spirits to the person. Mm-hmm. So once you remove the spirit or spirits from a person, you do an illumination with the client to remove the cause of these spirits coming to them. And then you do healing on the chakra and closing it up. Mm-hmm. And that way you get rid of the original causation. Now, using the other method, what I've been talking about the whole time, you may need to go to a therapist of some kind and talk about what issues may have brought that spirit to you, because you don't automatically get rid of the causation of the spirit being removed, and you may be okay, but on the other hand, you may not. You may still have traces of whatever it was that brought the spirit to you in the first place.
So if let's say I worked a different path, I worked deeply, really deeply on my core issues and had breakthroughs, would that break off the spirits, or would you still need to then remove the spirits and they would not come back because I had really worked on the issue underlying it?
I'm not certain, but I would say yes. Because again, all these things are symptoms.
Right.
All these past life things are symptoms. The spirits are symptoms, and this goes back to something that you did not resolve, in a past life. I think it was Dr. Fior who said that 98 or 99% of your problems in this life have their roots in a previous life. So that has to include the attached spirits.
This also indicates or kind of reveals that, we're a work in progress and not to be too hard on ourselves if we don't get everything done. It's impossible to have one life, at least from everything I've read. There's no one that just has one life and gets it all done, and take the pressure off yourself of feeling you have to fix everything all the time. You go as far as you can.
I remember something in a book called Conversations with God. And God's comment about that was, well, he said, would you say that if a person had led a misguided life for 60 years and in the months before he died, he suddenly resolved it, would you say that his life was a failure? No, of course not. And one of the interesting things about how things work on this planet is you have to keep on doing it. Again, in conversation with God, God says, if you want to accomplish something, you have to keep doing it over and over and over again. And what comes to mind is I was studying film at UCLA Extension a number of years ago, and Oliver Stone came to talk to some of the students and give a talk one day. And he said the first 10 screenplays he wrote were still sitting on a shelf.
Huh. Wow.
So, and every screenwriter will tell you that the first draft of his screenplay is absolute garbage. And then, you write a second draft and it's a little bit better. And then you write a third draft and it's a little bit better. And I just got through rereading parts of Act One by Moss Hart, who was a very famous playwright and producer and director in New York. And you read the story of what he went through with his first successful play. I mean, it went on for 2 years, and they didn't get it right until 3 days before opening.
Wow, that's a little nerve-wracking.
So they went for 2 years of mistakes, one after the other. So this is the whole point of reincarnation. Everybody's going to make mistakes. Some of the mistakes are horrendous. Some are not quite so bad. But you're not going to solve. You're not going to become perfect in one life. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
not going to happen.
So we have a couple minutes left into the show, and is there any advice or anything else you really want to close the show with about this really I find it really fascinating the more I read about it. I will say initially I was like, what? When I first heard about it, this can't be real. And then when you start seeing the evidence, you're like, okay, yes, it is real.
Well, let me say that Dr. Bill Baldwin, and I'm sure there are other people, he's deceased now, but he trained probably thousands of people to do spirit releasement. These people are therapists, they're ministers, they're psychiatrists, they're hypnotists, and some are like me. A few are metaphysicians like I am. So there are a lot of people out there, and if you think that there is something, and particularly if you've had physical problems, psychological problems, emotional problems that simply are not resolved or resolvable with traditional means, try somebody who does spirit releasement.
I think that's a great note to end our topic tonight. So please subscribe, like us, and thank you all so much for all your questions and comments tonight. We are really grateful for you listening in and participating. We'll be doing more of that. And thanks again, Dad. I really enjoyed having you here. We will have you again on another topic, I'm sure. And that's it for the night. And join us next week with Reverend Jim McGrath as we continue to explore the esoteric and obscure. Good night.